Hey guys, welcome to Anti-Hedge. You're speaking to Matt again, the founder. Before we continue with this educational crypto video, this is not financial advice. It shouldn't be misconstrued as such, and we don't accept any liabilities for losses that you may incur. There's been a lot of news going on in the Bitcoin and crypto space, and this is just going to be like a small general update just to keep you in line with what we're seeing and what everyone else is seeing. And the first thing I wanted to mention was Bitcoin hash power is going up, meaning that ever since the China crackdown, there's been more miners exiting China and finding new homes elsewhere. And all these new homes, guess what? It's more and more of them, it's increasing hash power. More hash power equals more price action, and that's why we're seeing the market recover. It's because now we see Bitcoin, it's not being stomped out for mining purposes. And one of the things I wanted to go over specifically with Bitcoin was a technical analysis I had done, and basically how it's breaking down in my perspective. I'm going to start it off. There was a technical I did on the 12th of August. I'm going to zoom in here and you're going to see most of these technical analysis, they break down in triangle patterns for some reason. From here, I was viewing it as an ascending triangle, right? Now within that ascending triangle, I'd found basically my support line at the bottom from previous bounces that had happened. Then from there, from the lowest bounce, basically going up from higher highs and higher lows, basically the trend of it going upwards. And from there, you see I form this baseline based off of the bounces that are forming on basically this technical analysis. And from here, what I do is I section off a part of this triangle to break it down so you can see, like, this is what happens if here at this point we break lower. This would be our trajectory towards the floor, let's say. And then if it goes forward, it goes up towards the sky, which is high price, which is what we want. Now, this is more or less how it's playing out. And this triangle here is basically the breakout triangle that we hit right here 12 days later. And as you can see, 12 days later, we're pretty much still following within this greater triangle, this greater ascending triangle. And at this point, you see we were pre-breakout. And now what we're looking at now in our current graph is this. Now this right here for me, usually right before Bitcoin will make a big move, it'll hit the corner of this ascending triangle. It'll have a big pullback. And then off it goes. And the thing that's interesting was that initial line here that I had done was based off of a previous top further back. So you see most of these things play out pretty symmetrically. Hold on a second, I gotta go a little bit farther back. But yeah, this is basically the line that I'd formed from the last drop, from the last major drop. So me, what I'm expecting is we bounced off of this support line that I've mapped out. And I'm thinking that we're going off this bounce towards the 54 range that way. And then from here, I'm going to be starting a new technical. But that was just a breakdown of how this technical analysis looks from my perspective. Obviously, I'm sure there's other people, they do different forms of TA. They'll disagree with me and others will agree with me. At the end of the day, technical analysis is all personal opinion, personal mapping, and then taking a bet on whether or not you might be right. But at the end of the day, no one can predict the market, and that's why we don't give financial advice here. So look, another thing too that I wanted to mention about Bitcoin, it's actually a really big thing, is Gensler, the head of the SEC. He's been talking about regulation for Bitcoin, as well as how he wants to form an ETF for Bitcoin and how he pictures it and how that could potentially affect the market. And I'm a little bit weirded out by how he's approaching this ETF. So most ETFs, most trusts, most things like that, they'll actually back their product by a certain amount of, let's say, Bitcoin or stock. So that way, if you make a fund or an ETF based off of something, there's got to be at least a certain amount of it inside the network. Otherwise, there's nothing really holding it there. And one of the things that I found weird was that he's planning on backing a Bitcoin ETF by Bitcoin futures. And most people are pretty perplexed by that because they're probably thinking like, what? Why would you back Bitcoin, a Bitcoin ETF with futures of Bitcoin instead of Bitcoin? So it's like, in other words, you're indirectly exposing it. You're indirectly pegging it or exposing it or backing it based off of the volatility of futures and leverage, which for me is automatically clearly a sign that Gensler either really doesn't understand the consequences of what he might be doing, or he does know really well. And that could go either way. It could either look something really ugly or really less ugly. Because no matter what, both sides are ugly. The first thing is he doesn't know what he's doing, and he's doing this based off of just trying to, let's say, not have Bitcoin directly linked to anything, doing it as a way to try and whip it into shape. But by not backing an ETF by actual Bitcoin, you'd be technically backing it by leveraged based futures, which at any point could pop. That would be a huge bubble because there's nothing actually backing it. You're backing it based off of smart contracts you're backing it based off of contracts that are being manipulated. So right off the bat, if he wants to put an ETF forward like that, I don't really see it working. And that would be, let's say, the less ugly scenario, ironically. And you're thinking, wait, that's the less ugly scenario where he doesn't know what he's doing. The more ugly scenario, and this one's actually a little bit creepy, but I figured I should mention it to you guys, is that if he ends up backing, let's say, the ETF by futures, he'll probably understand very well what he's doing, because at that point, he'd probably be accumulating Bitcoin for himself and for the government, and he wouldn't want to risk any of his own Bitcoin for that ETF, meaning that he's figured out how scarce it actually is, and he's not willing to put any of it up into the market. So these people who'd be buying these Bitcoin ETFs thinking they're getting exposure to Bitcoin wouldn't actually be getting exposure to anything. They'd actually be getting exposure to speculation. So for those reasons, I would never put a penny into a Bitcoin ETF unless it had actual Bitcoin in the trust or in the fund itself. And I felt like that was important to let you guys know my personal opinion of having a ETF backed by speculation. Even though Bitcoin is considered a speculative asset, at the same time, we're at a point where it's not, because you could buy a house, you could get a mortgage with Bitcoin now. Salaries are being paid for in Bitcoin now. People could get loans with Bitcoin now. The ecosystem's developing. To create an ETF that has no Bitcoin behind it, that's a bubble waiting to happen based off of speculation and leverage. That's going to pop hard. I would not trust that. And that's the ugly scenario where he's using the money from the ETF and the leveraging and basically that whole speculation bubble. He'd be using that bubble probably to buy Bitcoin for the United States, the SEC. So that's the uglier scenario. That's the scenario where he knows exactly what he's doing, and he's doing this to manipulate the people. Heavy. But we'll put a pin in that because we're going to see if he actually ends up putting forth an ETF. But that was his literal definition of how he plans on backing it. And I'll be leaving some sources in the YouTube at that point to basically give you how I heard about that. It was from Coin Bureau. So the next thing I wanted to mention too was that Visa has bought an NFT for $150,000 worth of Ethereum. So now that's a whole other fucking thing, because think of it this way. Visa buying an NFT is one thing. It's like, oh wow, they bought an NFT, but the reality is they bought it for $150,000 worth of Ethereum, meaning that Visa is in. Not only is it in, but it's deep in, if they have enough Ethereum to just throw out an NFT like that. And that makes me speculate that the whole Crypto.com partnership, the global partnership, isn't even necessarily just a partnership. I think it's just Visa. I think Visa probably owns them through one way or another. And that's their company, because Crypto.com launched their own NFTs as well. And guess what? That's a Visa-backed company. So it's starting to look more and more like these companies are being weaved into each other pretty deeply now. And with Visa buying an NFT, that just kind of goes to show like, hey, if they're buying an NFT, it's either one of two things. Either it's some form of money laundering, which is very possible, or the alternative is that, NFTs might be around for longer than we think. And these digital pictures might actually have value to some degree, depending on what you pick up, if you know what you're picking up. But, from there too, you got to ask yourself, NFTs, very tricky business. The best thing you could do is follow all the big drops on Twitter and online and Discords. It's like, that's really the only way you could get involved with NFTs. I wouldn't necessarily tell you guys to go and buy them, because what could you really say about a picture? A picture could be worth nothing as much as it could be worth something. So that's like definitely high risk. Consider that before you start buying NFTs thinking, Visa bought an NFT, I should go buy a bunch of them too. No, Visa bought a very specific one that's already very popular. And now it's a matter of, if you're going to play the NFT game, understand that you'll be hunting for very specific NFTs. With that in mind, I got nothing else to say. So I will like, comment, and subscribe. I hope you enjoyed our video. And beware of scammers in the comments, by the way, guys, because they do float around. Just remember, no one from Anti-Hedge will ever ask for any of your seeds, wallets, or any passwords. Nothing. We don't want your information. We just want you to enjoy these videos. So, guys, have a great night.